challenge is, how do you create a Jewish state in which every Jewish kid at the age of 8 or whatever knows what Ne'ilah is? It's the last prayer of Yom Kippur. You don't know that because you're really hungry by then, so it's a big fog. But those of us in the Bima have to call out the pages so we know. But in any event, that's a very big challenge. I'll tell you a story that'll just give you pause. When my son was in this year program that he did between high school and the army, so he was 17, 18-ish, I guess. He went off to Ain Prad, which is in the Judean desert, and it was a program for religious kids and non-religious kids together. They spent the year learning, and they went off to study Talmud. They had part of their program, and a guy named Donnie Siegel, who's Benji Siegel's son, came and taught them Talmud. The problem was that he had half the kids who'd been studying Talmud for 10 years, and half the kids had never seen a page of Talmud. So he brought the Steinsaltz, which in Hebrew was at least a level linguistic playing field, and they studied the first page of Babylonian Talmud, from when can you say Shema in the evening. And he taught them the basic structure of the argument. He said, okay, now go sit somewhere, one of you with more background, one of you with less, which meant one religious and one secular, and go make a list of all the questions that you can about this passage. We're going to come back and talk about this. My son goes off with some other kid, and my son says, okay, let's lay in some questions. So the kid says, well, what's the Shema? And my son, he doesn't know. He doesn't mean that kind of question. He's like, what does Rabbi X say from midnight? Rabbi Y says, until dawn. So the kid says, okay, those are good questions, but what's the Shema? And my son says, no, I think he means more like this. And the kid goes, okay, that's good, but what's the Shema? And then my son realized the mission is talking about from when can you say the Shema? And the kid didn't know what the Shema is. So Ne'ilah is the least of our problems. Now, why is it not that funny, actually? It's actually a security risk to the Jewish state in the following sense. If you don't know what the Shema is, then you are so unbelievably Jewishly ignorant that you actually can't say a coherent sentence about what the Jewish people stands for. Now, if you can't say a coherent sentence about what the Jewish people stands for, why should you care if the Jews have a state? And why should you certainly put yourself in the line of fire? There's no reason to. And it'll stop. And it's not an accident that in secular Tel Aviv, the rates of non-service in the army are astronomically high. Astronomically high. I have a friend who's a cardiologist for his military, his reserve duty. He sees soldiers who are appealing their profile. You get a certain profile, a physical profile. And based on the number, you can go into a combat unit, you can go into an elite combat unit, you can't go into combat at all. And he says he comes into the few days a month that he has to give. He's a cardiologist, he has to look through these files, and all the kids are sitting there in their boxer shorts on a long row of seats. And he said, I can tell you, if the kid is wearing a kippah, before I open up his file, I can tell you he's appealing to have his profile raised. And if the kid is sitting there with an earring and a this and a that, I can tell you he's appealing to have his profile lower. He doesn't want to be in combat. We've got to change that. We've got to create even secular Jews who know what Judaism stands for, who believe in it. Now, here's the part where I'm going to be very controversial. I do not believe that the response to that is in Masorti Judaism, at least in its current configuration. Masorti Judaism has not made significant roads into Israel because it's based fundamentally on a congregational synagogue model, and that is not how Israelis live their lives. Shuls, my shul at this time of the evening, at 8:45 at night, is locked and dark, and there's nobody in it, and it's never open at 8:45 at night, except for one Saturday night a year where there is the annual meeting, where you get to argue about things that I don't even know about because I don't go to the meeting. But our shul is open for Shachar, it's open for Mincha, it's open for Fire. It's a place where you go and you daven and you leave. Israelis build their religious and cultural lives around other kinds of institutions. And I think that's the great contribution that a reconfigured conservative movement or a reconfigured Masorti movement in Israel could make. But I certainly agree with you that the challenge is this. Here's what you have to understand the difference between American Jewish secularism and Israeli Jewish secularism. By and large, this is an overwhelming sort of generalization. I used to speak English, thank you very much. By and large, American Jews who are secular are the products of grandparents who came from Europe, didn't want to do it anymore, drifted away, did some stuff, the next generation did a little bit less, the next generation did less, and Israeli secular Jews are the products of grandparents, or great-grandparents, or great-great-grandparents, who slammed the door on tradition and joined Zionism as a rejection, just the way the Bialik did because of that poem that I told you about before. In other words, Israeli secularism is principled secularism. It is principled anti-religiousness. So they don't go to shul, not because it's boring, because they wouldn't be caught dead going into a shul. It's a matter of principle. American Jewish kids who don't go to shul, well, they sort of have never been brought to a shul. They do go, it's usually boring, they haven't been to a place like this, etc., etc., etc. So the challenges are different. The challenge in Israel, I think, is to educationally explain why, like most revolutions, the revolution went too far. The French Revolution went too far, the Hungarian Revolution went too far, and the Zionist anti-Jewish revolution also went too far. Here's the great news. There are all over Israel unbelievably fascinating experiments in young people rediscovering and re-embracing their tradition. I'll name you just two, but I could give you 15 if we had the time, and I know we don't. One of them is this series of mechinot that I just mentioned, which are for kids between high school and the army, and another version of them for post-army kids who, instead of going off to Nepal or to the forests of wherever to contemplate their navel or whatever, they actually go out to the Judean desert and they study Jewish texts for no credit, and it costs them money, and they live in unbelievably rugged kinds of settings. But they say, I'm an adult, I'm a grown-up, I've done the army, and all of a sudden I realize, I don't know anything about this. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these kids post-army, and many more hundreds of them pre-army doing this. It's a wonderful thing to see. I really have to get asked to go teach there, to see kids literally at 2 o'clock in the morning, not going to sleep and sitting in the Beit Midrash and studying Soloveitchik alongside, Nietzsche, or reading the Bible and reading some Christian philosophical whatever, and comparing and talking and arguing. It's pretty incredible. To watch them reading Genesis and comparing Thomas Jefferson on how nations are built. It's pretty unbelievable. Another example is a place called Ayalim, which when you go to Israel, if you get a chance to go see this place, it's totally worth it. It was started by 2 guys about 10 years ago, one of whom's uncle said to him, or grandfather said to him, what are you doing as soon as you get out of the army? And he said, well, I guess I'm going to travel, over Nepal, China, over here, over there. And the grandfather, the uncle, I forget which one it was, looked at him, his uncle, said to him with disdain, said, if my generation had your generation's attitude, you wouldn't have had a country to leave in the first place. And he was so humiliated by the obvious truth of what his uncle said. Every kid gets a little bit of money when you get out of the army. Get a little bit of money, most kids spend it in Nepal. They took 2 guys, took their money, and they bought 2 caravans. 2 of these little mobile, they're not mobile homes. You wouldn't call it a home, you just call it mobile. But they bought 2 of them, and they put them smack in the middle of the desert, not far from Dimona, and they said, we're going to build here a new student village. And eventually, by working with Shimon Peres and the president of Ben-Gurion University and raising a lot of private money, they built a place where kids go full-time to Ben-Gurion University, but they also commit 30, I think it is, hours a month to working in general communities in the area, Arab communities, Bedouin communities, Jewish communities, whatever, and 10 hours a month to working with their community, religious and non-religious, and they build the structures themselves, etc. It's basically going back to the 1920s and 1930s when young Zionists would actually build their little towns and then guard them, etc., etc. Now they don't have to guard them because they're in the sovereign state of Israel, but it's unbelievable the sense of passion there. Right now I think 27 such villages all across the country, some of them urban, some of them out in the middle of the boonies. And so that's a place called Ayalim. My wife and I just spent 2 days of Hanukkah there, just to sort of recharge our Zionist batteries. To watch these young people do what they do is unbelievably heartening. What's the problem? If you show that on CNN, it's a big yawn. It's much more interesting on MSNBC to show a 16-year-old with an M16 saying that Arabs are vermin. It makes for much better television. But it's a much smaller phenomenon than the thousands of kids now in these villages who are just going to university and living quasi-communally. There's one of these villages, by the way, which is all of them are religious and non-religious mixed together, where everybody decided that they were going to keep kosher homes so everybody could eat in everybody's house. Even the non-religious people who wouldn't be caught dead in a synagogue keep a kosher home, because that's what it means to build community. That's part of this new Jew. That's part of this question of trying to figure out what should Jewish life look like in the 21st century. We haven't figured it out.